Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Strenuous Conversations. It's about to get strenuous. Today we're going to be talking about Francis Thompson's poem, The Hound of Heaven, beginning the second section of the poem. First lines are, I pleaded outlaw-wise by many a hearted casement, curtained red, trellised with intertwining charities. For though I knew his love who followed, yet was I sore adread. This section has some interesting contrasts in it. I pleaded outlaw-wise by many a hearted casement. Curtained red, trellised with intertwining charities. So he's creating the image of the heart as a basement window or a casement window. It has red curtains, which are symbolic of the color red being symbolic of the color of the heart, of love. Trellised with intertwining charities. So the trellis is the lattice work that goes up on either side of the window. And people used to grow roses, vines, climbing flowers, whatnot, up and down these trellises around the outside of the windows. Trellised with intertwining charities. So he's pleading on people's love. He's knocking at the door of their love. And this is human love that he's looking for. Many a hearted casement. Many hearts. He's looking for love from these people. For though I knew his love who followed, yet was I sore adread. Lest having him, I must have naught beside. So, oh my God, that went too quickly. So in the first section, he talks about fear. How he's fleeing from this thing that he's afraid of. And usually things that we are afraid of are things that hate us. But in this case, he's not afraid of something that hates him. He is afraid of something that loves him. He knows the love of him who follows. For though I knew the love of him who followed, yet was I sore dread lest having him, I must have naught beside. He goes up to these people, he knocks, he begs, he pleads for them to love him. Because he's afraid that if he gives himself over to the love of this frightening creature behind him, he will not be able to have any other love in his life. But if one little casement parted wide, the gust of his approach would clash it too. How does that work? We know that the being that follows him is precisely God. How does God's approach clash shut the window of human love? I've noticed that it's the window that he's knocking at. How do you enter a house? The house of someone else's love. You enter by the door, but he is not entering by the door. He's pleading outlaw-wise by the window. He's trying to get in. He's trying to get in through the back door, through the window, through any other thing. Trying to use human love as an escape from God. But no sooner does someone begin to respond to him than God approaches. And God's approach slams shut the window on this human love. Why? Fear wished not to evade, as love wished to pursue. This is a reference to, I think it's the first letter of John. Perfect love casts out all fear. Well, what is it that we're afraid of? Precisely perfect love. That is why perfect love casts out all fear. In one sense, it's because the two are mutually exclusive. You cannot perfectly love if you are afraid, but we, in our weakness, silliness, ignorance, we are afraid of perfect love because it threatens to take away all the lesser loves that we've grown comfortable with. In Thompson's case, it already has taken them away. Remember, by the time he's writing this, he's already living on the street in London, trying to score opium. And everybody that he meets ignores him. Everybody he meets ignores him, looks the other way, closes their eyes, walks past, talks a little bit louder so they can pretend that they didn't notice him. And this happens to him every day. This happens to him every day. It shapes how he sees himself. But what guise is God following him in? What does that look like? You know, in the poem, he's using the imagery of a hound, but what does that look like in real life? To a real man sleeping in a gutter. For God to be pursuing you. I will say that in my work at the jail and in an addiction clinic for a while, I've seen a lot of homeless folks, addicts, petty criminals, even some rather serious criminals who were convinced that despite everything, God still loved them and still had mercy on them. And they had a level of faith that survived, not I think, despite their circumstances, but because of their circumstances. Francis Thompson, being a very gifted poet, expresses this rather better than your average homeless drug addict. But this is not a special experience of Francis Thompson. It is, I think, actually an experience that's fairly widespread among people who have some grave misfortune. The experience of being pursued by a God who loves, with a love that is terrifying in its intensity, and in its demand on us to rise to be worthy of that love. But the experience also of shame, of our own unworthiness, is, I think, fairly universal as well. So, the next line, across the margent of the world I fled, troubled the gold gateways of the stars, smiting for shelter on their clanged bars, fretted to dulcet jars and silvern chatter the pale ports of the moon. Fleeing through the night, the image of a fugitive or an outlaw continues running down the street. He's left the world behind. He's not even trying anymore with human charities as much. He's troubling the gold gateways of the stars. We know that Thompson, in his years on the street, we know that he carried with him a copy of Blake and a copy of Aeschylus, and that he sought refuge in public libraries. And there's an element in that of escape, trying to escape his surroundings. But what if his surroundings are not the only thing that he's trying to escape? What if he's also trying to escape from God? And he looks for escape in these starry words, in the moonlight of poets, himself being a poet. But finds that holding moonlight in his hand holds nothing. These are not defense. They are not an adequate block against the reality of God. I said, to dawn be sudden, and to eve be soon. With thy young skyey blossoms, heap me over from this tremendous lover. Float thy vague veil about me, lest he see. To dawn be sudden, and to eve be soon. A part of the experience of being homeless, of living on the streets, without a job, without, in Thompson's case, without a social network, living from one high to the next, is this phenomenon, this loss of the passage of time. It's not that time doesn't pass, it's that time blurs. One day melts into the next. Day, night, day, night, day, night, and never-ending cycle. To dawn be sudden. When is it going to be tomorrow? To eve be soon. When is it going to be nighttime? When is it going to be tomorrow? When is it going to be night? When is it going to be tomorrow? Some of my meth patients, they don't even like the high from meth. They do it because they can stay awake for days, and it's better than sleeping on the street. And then when they're tired, they can no longer maintain it, then they switch to heroin. Thompson describes something similar to this. Fleeing from this day to the next day, to the next day, to the next day, with no hope of the cycle ever ending. And most of my addicts, most are consciously aware only of fear, of boredom, of being dope sick, needing that next fix. Some are consciously aware of shame. I'm ashamed, I'm not good enough to be seen in society. I'm not good enough for normal people. Or they're aware of the hypocrisy of most normal people, but they're still ashamed of having fallen and not lived up to what they were capable of. If we remember back to the Leisure, the Basis of Culture videos, the despairing refusal to be oneself. This acedia is not the vice necessarily just of the rich and the wealthy or the leisured. It is the vice of those whose whole life is caught up in the search for their needs, even if that need is an artificial one, like a drug. Just because an addiction is spurred on by past choices does not mean that the need is any less real. With thy young sky blossoms, heap me over from this tremendous lover. Float thy vague veil about me, lest he see. Thompson's aware that this running from one day to the next is not hiding him from anything. It's a skyey blossom, a vague veil. There's a reference here, perhaps to Adam and Eve, who after they committed their first sin, their initial reaction was shame. And what do? They make garments for themselves out of leaves. They sew fig leaves together and hide from God. And what does Adam hear? The voice of God walking in the garden. Where are you? Thompson is creating his own metaphor. He's creating his own fable. But this fable is not spun out of whole cloth. He is borrowing references. And one of these references, as most poets do borrow references, one of the references he's borrowing is this primeval story from Genesis of this shame response. We have fallen short of what God has called us to be, and so we are ashamed, we look away, we hide our face, kind of like my toddler. If I can't see you, you can't see me. That's not how that works. Stupid computer. tempted all his servitors, but to find my own betrayal in their constancy, in faith to him, their fickleness to me, their traitorous trueness, and their loyal deceit. He's trying to find shelter from God, among the things of God, among the creatures that God has created, and finding that none of them will shelter him. Getting tired. Their traitorous trueness and their loyal deceit. Their first allegiance is to God. And this is true whether they are inanimate objects or people. So we think about that Anglican lay missionary who, out of charity, took Thompson in, gave him a job, a place to sleep, food, perhaps a wage, we don't know, but demanded something in return, or not in return, demanded that he work, demanded that he put in his hours at the shop, show up on time, maybe look presentable, we don't know that, but possibly look presentable, sell the boots, talk to the customers. He was calling Thompson to be more than he was, perhaps not understanding that Thompson was not capable of it at that point in his life, and perhaps never was capable of holding down a job in a shop, even certainly wasn't capable of it even before he began his opium addiction. Nevertheless, it's the wrong one. Nevertheless, there was, for this man, an assumption that Thompson needed to live up to the gift. And when he couldn't do it, after a few months of trying, this man let him go, had to send him back. Thompson bears him no ill will. He doesn't complain about this. He says, I tempted all his servitors, but to find my own betrayal and their constancy. It is precisely their fidelity to their call as servants first of God that feels like a betrayal to Thompson. Their traitorous trueness, their loyal deceit. Because at this point, he is demanding love from humans without being either willing or able to respond to that love in kind. To all swift things for swiftness did I sue, clung to the whistling mane of every wind. But whether they swept smoothly fleet the long savannas of the blue, or whether, thunder-driven, they climbed his chariot toward to heaven, plushy with flying lightnings round the spurn of their feet, fear wist not to evade, as love wist to pursue. He's grabbing onto the wind, trying to gain swiftness from things that are immaterial, that the wind, that we know not where it comes from or whither it blows, and was likened to the Holy Spirit by Jesus in John's Gospel. This wind is sometimes violent, plashy with flying lightnings round the spurn of their feet, and sometimes smooth and swift, but always insufficient. He's creating this image again of running away, of fleeing, and using the very wind that is the Holy Spirit as a means to propel him away from God. And it doesn't work. Fear wist not to evade, as love wist to pursue. He repeats this line again. Fear wist not to evade, as love wist to pursue. He knows what it is that's following him. It's not a threat. It's not God trying to destroy him, to punish him, to get back at him. It's God trying to forgive him and to bring him home. And it is precisely this that he's afraid of. Why? I think anyone who has seriously confronted their own sinfulness, I would say any Catholic who's ever made a good confession, is well aware of that answer, is shame. It's the same motive that caused Adam to hide from God in the Garden of Eden, and to create fig leaves or to take fig leaves and create clothes for himself. This shame that is itself a sort of veiled pride. I will be worthy of God's love before I accept it. But that's not possible. It is only God's love that can make us worthy of his love. And at any rate, it's not working out for Francis Thompson, because he ends this section by saying, still with unhurrying chase and unperturbed pace, deliberate speed, majestic instancy, came on the following feet, and a voice above their beat, naught shelters thee, who wilt not shelter me. All the running and hiding in the world doesn't protect us from God, because we are hiding from God in the things that he has made. It's like trying to hide from the author of a book inside the book that he's written. You can't do it. He knows every page of that book. He knows every creature and every shadow in the universe. There is nothing that we can hide from him in. Now, for someone who is already aligned with mercy, this is a source of comfort, but it is not for Thompson, because he is still actively fleeing God. I will pick up next week with the next section as he continues his efforts to run away from God and the various things he tries there. And that's all for today. I'm just going to do my stretching and a couple of sets of pull-up as usual, and then I'll be done. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, hit subscribe, hit like, share the video, and we'll see you next week.